for this evening was looking forward. And when I was pondering that, I thought there's actually two ways of interpreting the phrase looking forward. I don't know whether you can see this image, but you can either see one thing or another thing. I'm not telling you what they are, just in case your eyes are getting really confused, and it's fun working out whether you see A or B, A being two profiles and B being a vase. And looking forward, you can look forward with Can you hear me now?
Yes, better, sir.
Am I going to have to repeat everything I've just said? I was just basically saying, for those of you who weren't joining us me a moment ago, sound-wise, that looking forward has two meanings. You can either look forward with excitement or you can look forward with anxiety. Looking forward to something or looking forward with a certain amount of dread. And I was trying to work out when I was preparing this presentation at the weekend, which one it was. And I actually came to the conclusion that to look forward, you had to do a tiny bit of looking backwards. Where are we coming from? And I was reflecting, and it's actually you could argue that tonight, as I'll say in the later slide, is a week too early because we've got a board meeting next week, which will consider many of the things I'm going to include in the presentation tonight. But actually, I haven't got any board members in the room. I've got some online, so if you can mute them, if I, give them a heads up. So, and we adopted a new corporate strategy in March last year. And funnily enough, in March last year, we hadn't, well, actually, I suppose we were a month past the invasion of Ukraine by the Russians, but we hadn't really realized all the implications and consequences that were going to come along. So we actually agreed what I thought was a realistic but ambitious strategy to cover the next 4 years. And a report goes to the board next week, which just looks back over the first 12 months of the new corporate strategy and says, what have we done? And I was doing a totting up exercise, and we're reporting back to the board on 130 projects or initiatives that have been undertaken in the last 12 months to deliver that new corporate strategy. And you may or may not be able to read what's on the screen, but broadly speaking, the darker the area, the more projects or initiatives are going on. So you see in frontline repairs, we've got 19 projects, all the way around to finance with 5. That doesn't mean that 5 in finance is just little small things, and everything in frontline repairs has been huge, because actually it's been a mix and match. Some are small and some are big, so it doesn't reflect the workload. Now, I could take you through the 130 projects, but apparently some people need to eat tonight. A bit unreasonable. So I thought I would just put 3 slides up of some examples of things that have happened over the last 12 months. And one of them is what we haven't done. Bearing in mind, we're an association that's committed to tackling homelessness, committed to the 9 commitments of Homes for Cathy. I've ended up recently being appointed the chair of the Norfolk Strategic Housing Partnership, which has the ambition of eradicating homelessness in Norfolk. So what we haven't done is we haven't refused anybody a social tenancy on the grounds of affordability alone. If people can't afford a social tenancy, what are they supposed to afford? As I had a meeting yesterday, we had a group of us from Homes for Cathy meeting the homelessness minister. It was a sort of typical ministerial meeting. It was on Teams. It was a half-hour meeting, which 10 minutes before, was it 10 minutes? Might have been a quarter of an hour before, got reduced to 20 minutes. And therefore you had to squeeze everything in. But actually it was speaking with pride about what Homes for Cathy has delivered in culture change or cultural reminder to housing associations across the country. The disappointing thing was I'm not quite sure the minister was in full reception mode, because I'm sure that when she gave her little spiel at the end, she had written it before we'd said anything. Although she did actually make reference to something that Broadland does, which is on the arrears and what's happened on arrears with the ability to freeze people arrears, the commitment not to evict somebody if they're engaging with us. I'm not going to go through all of them. Dale, who joined us in November, would be like, when it comes to his appraisal by Louise, the fact is that the team, not just Dale, to be completely honest, but the team had cleared the pandemic backlog of repairs, which was a real drag. And I'll share some performance data in a moment. We know that we've still got work to do. 202 of our tenants have been supported by a welfare benefits advisor to make it more likely that they can sustain their tenancy. And there's other things on that slide, including, actually, I'll mention it now because you'll see I've got the relets slide, that we've worked successfully and a pilot, which now needs to be built on with Norfolk County Council and North and Health on actually housing with care and sort of step down from hospital for people, which actually, you know, we were talking earlier today with some people where I was about the bed blocking that's going on in hospitals where people could be moving into housing with care or other facilities, which would create capacity, which would help. A couple more examples here. Huge progress on electrical safety tests. Okay, we're not at 100% yet, which was a target by the end of next year or sooner. But actually now we've got 94.5% of our properties with an electrical safety test that's less than 5 years old. That's a big exercise because actually when you knock on the door to somebody and say, we're here to do an electrical test, you're almost taking off occupation. It takes 4 hours to do normally an electrical safety test. And it's a really big commitment. And it's a really big resource commitment. We built 16 housing first properties, additional housing first properties. You may have seen the ones on the bottom of Ketts Hill in Norwich, which we marked the completion of about 3 weeks ago. And the day before yesterday, we will mark the near completion, because they're actually completed tomorrow, of 5 properties down in Thetford with Broadland Council. We provided homes for prison leavers. I was completely shocked 4 or 5 years ago when I went out with Pathways one day, which is the group in Norwich, including St Martin's and Norwich City Council, Salvation Army and some other agencies. And I was talking for quite a long time with a prison leaver who had left prison 6 days earlier, and his housing solution was being given a sleeping bag. And he was saying 6 days later, he had stopped taking his meds for his mental health issues, and actually he was considering reoffending just so he could be safe again. I mean, 10 properties isn't much, but 10 properties is better than none. And that's been a great partnership. Oh, yes, there's 22 new tenants since March 22. Well, we can pat ourselves on the back, but my target is about multiply that by 10 or 100, if I'm honest. You know, we've got 5,500 properties. We must have over 10,000 people living in our homes. And actually, we should have many, many more tenant shareholders, tenant members, able to influence, able to engage, able to be at exciting events like this where the technology doesn't work. A few more examples, which I now can't read because I've left the font size too small, but I think I referred there to the fact we've drawn down another £10 million from BAE Pension Fund at an incredibly cheap interest rate, something like 2.6%, fixed for 30 years. So well below even what the Bank of England are looking at right now. We've established a new structure. And except when Catherine left, we established a new structure with assistant directors, and there's some of those in the room this evening. We've rolled out a powerful monthly performance report for board, and actually using technology, which I'm now going to try to show you a few examples of. Unfortunately, I'm not doing it live, because if I tried to do it live, I could almost guarantee it would fall over this evening. So I did some screen prints recently. So this comes out monthly for board, and they can draw it down whenever they want. There's a huge number of pages in it because I did press the button and said export the whole thing to a PowerPoint presentation, and it told me it couldn't because it was more than 50 pages. But that's information that the board members can draw down when they want it. They don't have to wait for us to produce something. They can actually look in on it. It's a bit like when we first went into COVID 3 years ago, we produced a daily COVID Power BI report for leadership group and the board, which renewed every single morning, and board members were able to engage with that to see what were the consequences of COVID on our operations, what was going on. So I'll just give you some examples. This one is the current tenant rent arrears as at the end of February. And this is a really good news story, actually. You may not be able to see it, and I would walk across the screen, but then, well, these people wouldn't be able to hear me properly. But the green line, which is, I can't see that screen to show you. Quick. Oh, I just killed it off. The green line is where we are right now. And what's really interesting about this, and the point I was making to the minister yesterday, Felicity Buchan, was since we introduced in 2018 the commitment to engage, that tenants that engage with us, we wouldn't evict, actually our arrears have been really rather good. There was that fear that it would all get out of control. But actually that didn't happen. And actually you can see our arrears are green in line, but also green in where we think we should be right now. Reactive repairs completed at first visit. Whoops, you see that horrid bit where it was definitely way down. The green line again has caught up. There was a dip when we were completing the backlog where actually we were redirecting people to go to places where actually there was a backlog repair as opposed to the repair that was reported in the last few days. We're still amber, but it's an improving situation, and I'm reassured to know. I'm pretty sure that somebody in this room told me that we're going to go green.
Definitely going green.
Is there a date on it? Or is it we're going to go green on a Friday? We're just not sure which Friday it is.
I think if I say
April, May,
yeah,
or possibly sooner. We'll wait and see. And then this next one, which I won't be able to read properly on my screen because there's an awful lot of data, but really interesting data, is the average relet time by asset or tenure. It's a slide that Steph was really looking forward to. So you can see that in February, for example, general needs, which is the column on the far side, if you're looking at it over here, and on the left, if you're looking at it on screen, our relet time was 12 days. You'll also notice that our relet time in housing with care was 155 days, which is shocking. And it's not because there isn't demand, it's because the system isn't working. The system, I have to confess, Mol, I don't know how many years ago you left the board, but I think every board meeting since 2009, we've discussed housing with care and the fact that we're carrying too many voids and that we know there are people out there. And it's a real engagement with Norfolk County Council and with Norse. It's about having a dedicated resource to help us with the allocations. And actually, I think we're now, I'm looking at Steph a little bit, but I think we're just now on the possibility that if I was giving this presentation in 12 months' time, all other things being equal, and on the basis of so much has happened in the last 12 months with inflation and interest rates, I do emphasize with all other things being equal, you never know exactly what's coming around the corner. That is going to radically improve. You know, a point made by Simon Hibbard, who's one of our board members and is a retired GP, is he absolutely knows as a retired GP, as from when he was a GP, that housing with care extends lives. If you get people in there at the right point, as opposed to getting them when they're beyond that point where independent living really works for them. You know, I think the average age last year of somebody coming in, if you ignore the step down, was probably about 83. And really, people should be moving in their 70s. And I remember going with Simon to one of our schemes when he first joined the board, so that's probably 6 years ago, 5 years ago now, and he met somebody who he was so pleased was living in this scheme because he had been a patient, and he turned to me later and said that person would have been dead if he hadn't come here. And so we have the ability to transform lives as an organisation, but we have to work with our partners, and we have our partners to be as committed as us. Not really yet. I think the step down is a model that's worked. I mean, we're finishing the pilot now and we're trying to work out what the next steps are. The reality, I mean, John Barber, who's been on our board and is on the board of Broadland St Benedict's, is an exec director at James Paget. And he constantly says, you know, to keep somebody in a hospital bed overnight costs us £600. And if social services can't get their system lined up, but also you've got to remember social services are constrained budgets. So if you get somebody out of hospital into something that costs £300, it's a saving to the public purse, but it's not a saving to social services. It's so we've got to get the partnership working. One of the really good things, not in my presentation, so I mentioned earlier that I become chair of the Norfolk Strategic Housing Partnership, which was set up in 2020. And we have health, and we have every single local authority, including the county, including social services. We have the police, we have DWP, we have the homeless charities like St Martin's, all around the table with the same commitment. And gradually, we're getting to the point where you can have effective discussions where you forget who your employer is and what badge you walked into the meeting. You arrive with the objective of delivering a system change that makes a difference to homelessness. Okay, we're starting with rough sleeping because it's the most visible point. I think we've always got to remember that rough sleeping is about 10 to 15% of homelessness. So it might be the most visible, but actually there's an awful lot of other stuff. So I'm hopeful gradually, you know, Rome wasn't built in a day was always the phrase, that we're getting somewhere. But it's been 14 years of board meetings where we've discussed this. And finally, in the last 12 months, I think we've got to a place where at least we know someone's listening on the other side. It would be careless of me not to mention social housing interest cover, which I'm sure is been the top of your priorities when you were coming tonight to know. So social housing interest cover, Ian is carefully driving back from Liverpool at present to avoid having to talk about social housing interest cover. It's a key golden rule that the association's board has, which is that actually the cost, the income from social housing covers the costs of providing social housing. If you look at our bottom line, we have gift aid from Broadland and St Benedict's in it, and that gift aid is excluded. So when the funders look at it, they want to know it's excluded sometimes, although it's not a covenant with the funders, because they want to know that the core business is actually financially viable. You know, we don't judge our success by the balance sheet, but the balance sheet has to be viable for us to be successful. And this is the first alert you get of some of the implications of the financial crisis of interest rates and inflation. Because the reason it's green and blue is green was the budget we agreed last March to cover this financial year. And you got part of the way through the year, interest rates going up, inflation hitting us, and we had to do a rebudgeting exercise, which is where the blue came in. And you'll see that we've got down to February, where we're getting very close to our golden rule. And actually, we will finish the year below our golden rule. And that's just quite key information because it influences what's happening now and what's happening for the next 12 months. And, you know, not just for Andrew and Alex being in the room, I thought I ought to put a slide in that showed that despite everything, we've carried on building. And if only I could read the slide on the screen, on my screen, I would tell you that affordable rents we've built. What's it? The green is planned and the blue is actual. So we've outperformed. We're performing well in the development side. Hold that thought, because if you go back to that particular slide, it has implications. When we agreed the corporate strategy in March last year, we wanted to deliver 150 new affordable homes a year, 100 rented and 50 shared ownership. That was the target, and that was what was sustainable in the business plan that we agreed in May last year. But life has changed. So I think why put in some information about why the last year is actually, I think it's important for us to recognise the ambitions we had last March and not forget them. And actually also to remember that they were purposeful ambitions. And by that, or purposeful intentions, the enduring purpose of Broadland is to help people who can't afford the open market secure homes. That's our business. That's why we were set up 60 years ago. The first board meeting of Broadland happened on the 9th of January 1963. I have to tell you that 1963 was an incredibly good year. Some things that were produced in 1963 are exceptional. I don't know why I say that, but I thought it's important to mention it. But the core purpose is still the same core purpose. So when we come up with a business plan, when we come up with a budget, when we come up with a corporate strategy, all the time it's about delivering that enduring purpose, making a difference to people's lives who can't afford the open market, whether it's for ownership or for renting. Yeah, I mean, if you think about, this is a different presentation, of course, but if you think about Cathy Come Home, which was broadcast for the first time in November 1966, I would be precise and say it was 8 o'clock on the 16th, but I'm not sure it was actually 8 o'clock. It might have been 8:30. And about the same time as that was broadcast, both Shelter and Crisis were set up. And neither of those organisations wanted to celebrate their 50th anniversary. Both organisations thought that actually, even back in 1963, that homelessness was going to be something that was just a bad memory by 1988. And actually, arguably, we're heading in totally the wrong direction. And part of that is that the social housing sector, this is a completely different presentation. It counts for CPD for those of you who need CPD. Social housing sector today is smaller than it was in 1979. There are fewer homes owned by social landlords, and a good example is Norwich City Council. It's 10,000, 11,000 properties smaller than it was in 1979. So despite all the stuff that we've built as a sector over the last 45 years, we haven't even stayed level with where we were. Norwich City Council have right to buy, and they're not allowed to reinvest that on a one-for-one basis. Yeah, well, I'm not going to get into politics tonight, it would be wrong. So I put this sentence, which is really trying to encapsulate why looking forward is a really difficult title. It's a contrast with the bit of looking forward that I'm not looking forward to. You know, we've achieved a lot in 12 months, despite some really tight financial challenges, despite the first time, I'm coming up to 20 years at Broadland in May, and it's the first time we've had to do a mid-year rebudget. But despite that, we've still got 130 projects or initiatives underway in the last 12 months. When we look at where we are today, I just grabbed these few headlines from Sky, The Observer and the BBC. Energy crisis, household finances face worst hit from surging bills since 1970 by the end of this year. That was January 2022, so they already knew. Britain's welfare system unfit for purpose with millions struggling, experts warn. Surging food prices push inflation to a 30-year high. I think I read this week or last week that food inflation right now is running at 17%. And, you know, the sector braces for a £7 billion loss in latest rents policy shift. You know, things are tough. Like, yeah, please do. Cheer me up.
Those flats were built with so much insulation, it's unbelievable.
You don't even have to, yeah.
Okay, yes, I am paying more than I was, but I'm not paying anything like as much as some people are.
No, I'm trying to persuade Catherine, my wife, that we should, you know, turn off the smart meter because it's such a depressing experience to even glance at it. I was looking at it this morning and working, I thought I've turned off everything and it's still running at 50 pence an hour and I'm going out. That's, you know, that's going to be pounds spent whilst I'm not in there. This is just outrageous, but there you go. So what's that?
I just like to say that because it just goes to show that if we're building new properties and they're being built with really top class insulation, it's making.
You do, of course, sometimes get the other problem with overheating in the summer.
Oh, yes, you do.
Which is the other challenge. It's getting the balance.
Oh, yes.
So I'm going to share a slide. I want to share some slides that I've shared with the senior management team after our November board. So I'll give some context each time if I can. So the first one, and well, actually this is the first one, and we've got a bit of a break, is understanding what inflation and interest rate movements mean to Broadland. So when we were trying to work out, sitting there in November, talking initially about what the rent cap implications would be for Broadland. And I think this is interesting from a key perspective here about the implications of some of the economic indicators moving last year. A 1% rent increase from last year, from the current year's rent, 1% represents £250,000 worth of income to us. So you can multiply it out what 7% equals. A 1% increase in interest costs cost us £700,000. And we've seen what's been going on with base rate, which is why one of the decisions that we're currently facing is deferring the point we go out to borrow more money. That's why that BAE pension fund money of 10 million at 2.61% was remarkably good. We wouldn't be able to repeat that at all right now. It would cost 3 times as much money. So looking at the next year, before I come to the slides I'm going to share from the brief that I gave senior managers after the November board. I think I'm basing some of what I'm saying on discussions that will take place next week. So I look to my board members who are online to say, you know, there's a caveat there. We haven't got an approved budget. In the ideal world, this presentation would be taking place in 2 weeks' time. But I thought I would mention the process the board started in November. I would say, actually, we've had the most comprehensive set of discussions about rent increases, about budget, and about our business plan ambitions that we've had ever in the 20 years. Now, you could argue that's because we haven't had that huge financial pressure on us. But actually, even back in November, we were talking about these issues. There was a very comprehensive debate at the board, which the majority of a board meeting, where we looked back firstly at the assumptions that we made in the business plan and the corporate strategy last year. I mean, June last year seems an age ago, really, in some ways. We looked at what was going on rents. We looked at our funding costs, how much it was costing us to borrow money for both new development, but also to refinance existing debt. We looked at asset management and the implications of what was going on, and we looked at the development consequences. And then we asked the board a series of strategic questions to give us, as the exec and leadership team, an understanding of what we should and shouldn't be prioritising in thinking about the budget, thinking about rent increases, and thinking about the business plan. Because actually, just so to complete the picture, normally we agree in January the rents, we then agree in March the budget, and then we agree in May the business plan, which is a bit higgledy-piggledy, actually, if you think about it. We agree what our income is before we know what we need to spend, and we agree both of them before we decide where we actually want to be in 5 years' time. And actually, you need to have that triangulation. You need that debate to be. So actually, I think what we've done this year has been best practice in terms of working out the implications of anything. So I'm literally just going to share the answers to questions that we asked the board and what they said about it. So we knew there was going to be a rent cap. We didn't know, I don't think at the date of the November board, we might have just known whether it was going to be what the rent cap was going to be, whether it was going to be 7%, 5%, or something different. We assumed in the answer I get, we assumed the 7% because we thought that was going to be where we would end up. Strictly speaking, the government's rent direction only affects social and affordable tenancies. So intermediate, etc., weren't constrained in the same way, and shared ownership rents. And actually, we asked the board, are you comfortable if we adopt the rent cap on all tenures? So all tenures where there's a rental income coming into Broadland, are you comfortable that we will, we won't use the opportunity? So, for example, shared ownership rents on the element that's not that they rent could have gone up by 10.1%. And no, we actually said let's agree 7% as a cap, but let's also model the 5% just to see what the consequences would be. The second question we asked them, so within the direction from government, the tenants living in their property on the 1st of April get the 7% cap. If actually a property became empty on the 2nd of April in a social rented property, strictly speaking, we could have increased the rent by 11.1%. In other words, the rent formula still applied. The government's direction only applied to current tenants. And actually, that felt really uneasy for us. So the question we asked them, do you agree that actually we should just cap at the same rent? And actually, whilst it was only guidance in November, the decision made in January was that unless something comes along that really horrifies us and we desperately need a little bit of additional income in the year, let's keep 7% at relet. Affordable rents are slightly different. You have a calculation, and intermediate rents, affordable rents, intermediate rents will be recalculated by reference to the open market. Asset management, I think with planned investment, cyclical maintenance and responsive maintenance is actually how 99.9% recurring of our tenants judge our success as an organisation. But it's also the biggest cost to the organisation. And our aim has consistently been, over the time I've been at Broadland, to go beyond what the government required us to do. And actually, bearing in mind where we are, so 7% rent caps, we estimate that the operational inflation rate running on the organisation has been nearer 15%. So in real terms, our income is significantly down for next year. We said, we're going to model, are you comfortable that we model just decent homes compliance and compliance with building safety requirements? And I think I deliberately put reluctant acceptance with a caveat that we must focus on damp and mould. A complete aside here, really, which may or may not be appropriate. I I completely agree with Michael Gove, the Secretary of State, and Richard Blakeway, the Housing Ombudsman, that actually housing associations should not say it's lifestyle choice that's given you damp and mold. Where I disagree with them is I think fuel poverty has caused a lot of damp and mold in people's homes. When people can't afford to heat their homes, and I was given a complete anecdote, but last summer I was talking over in Yarmouth, and there was a head teacher of a primary school that was saying 75% of his pupils were on free school meals, and he estimated 45% lived in homes where they turn the electricity off in the evening. That's not lifestyle choice, and that's poverty that will probably on a scale that we haven't seen since the 70s, creeping back in. And it does cause us issues because, you know, homes that would be perfectly adequate and not experience damp and mold if they were adequately heated will this winter and going forward experience damp and mold. And it's how we stay on top of that. So it was about ensuring that we retained enough capacity to deal with where we thought we were going to go on that. We agreed with them. We have got some poorly performing homes. We've actually got a better, the average energy efficiency of our homes is better than the national average of housing associations of social housing. But we've still got some properties that aren't very good, and some properties that aren't very good and actually would be really expensive to reach an adequate standard. And what we said to the board is, do you agree that when one of those properties becomes empty, that actually we consider disposing of them so we can reinvest that money, the surplus on that sale, in other properties to bring their energy efficiency up, rather than just saying, you know, we're going to have to put on hold energy efficiency works. It's really interesting. Back in, I'm going to say 2015, Andrew might know, about 2015, we had done this analysis of the whole of the Broadland housing stock, and we had put on top of that what we knew about individual households. And there were just over 1,000 properties that we were unhappy with in terms of their energy efficiency. And, you know, the worse they became in inverted commas, the less easy they were to sort out. So we went to the board and we had this discussion, really constructive discussion, and we agreed that having done the analysis, somebody had sat there with a spreadsheet and a calculator, steam coming out of their ears, worked out that if we sold 73 of those 1,000 odd properties, the surplus on those 73 would fund all the others, and we would get all of them up. So that was really good. It was going to be really easy because actually we have a turnover rate of our social rented of 5 or 6% a year, 1,000 properties, put 5, well, that would be easy. We haven't actually have vacancies in that portfolio of more than about 10 or 15 properties over the last 8 years, which reinforces the point that people live where they want to live because it's convenient and it fits in with the rest of their lifestyle, where their family are, where the schools are, where they can get support, etc., employment. So at this point, we agreed with the board that we would, if poorly performing properties came up, we would consider disposal rather than reletting them. I think there's a further discussion and there's a willingness through our teams that when tenants are struggling because they're living in a poorly performing property, we will have that discussion with them. The problem is, and it's a problem that probably we have more than, say, a stock transfer housing association, is our homes are spread across the county and a bit of Suffolk. And that means that that property in that isolated rural village might be exactly where they want to live, but it's the only property they've got a choice of. And it might be fine coming along and saying to us, we're willing to move, but we won't have a replacement property in that location. So it's not as easy as it sounds, but it's something that we will keep looking at. Linked to the energy efficiency, our target was always quite an aggressive target. Actually, I've worked out that nearly every year in the last 5 years, we moved the target out by 1 year. But the 2022 business plan that we agreed last May and submitted to the regulator in June showed that we would achieve a minimum EPC standard of C by 2028. As a sector, we're required to achieve it by 2030. So we've had to remodel for this year. And our business plan that will be considered by the board in May, and the headlines we'll have next week, is actually that we move out that target to 2030. You can see why I wasn't looking forward with excitement to talking about looking forward. So they said, yeah, okay, but can you outperform it? So go back to that slide. That's the only way we'll probably outperform it. And then I'm sure I could do a test about what EBITDA MRI stands for. EBITDA MRI, I mean, I could tell you what it stands for. I could actually. And I will in a second, but I'll first say it is the covenant that we have to comply with. In other words, it's the one in our funding agreements. And if we breach for more than 1 year, we're allowed to breach 1 year, but they don't really like it. If we breach for more than 1 year, they can ask for their money back. Thank you very much indeed. And right now, we've borrowed £212 million. So giving them £212 million would be quite a tricky exercise. So we had golden rules, which is a margin above what it should be. And we said, will you reduce the EBITDA MRI one so we've got less of a margin? I know you're wanting me to tell you what it is. It's earning before interest, tax, depreciation, amortization, major repairs included, which is something that slips off the tongue. And if we didn't, an easier way of putting it is if we didn't have Broadland St Benedict's giving us gift aid, social housing interest cover and EBITDA MRI would be exactly the same. Because we got gift aid, it distorts one, so that's why we benefit from the gift aid that Broadland St Benedict's. When we sell properties down at Canary Quay, we benefit. Ironically, we benefit the year after we made the sale. A funny little rule here: if Andrew and Alex and people sell an open market flat down at Canary Quay, the profit on that comes in the year later in gift aid. If they sell a shared ownership flat down at Canary Quay, it comes in the year that it's earned. So we have this funny timing issue right now. I won't say that Andrew's trying to delay a few shared ownership sales into the new financial year that starts in 3 weeks' time, or 2.5 weeks' time, but actually completing a shared ownership sale on the 31st of March means that none of that profit actually goes into something that we can spend on anything. If it's completed on the 1st of April, it can go into asset management or energy efficiency. Whereas actually, if you can complete as many sales on open market properties before the 31st of March, midnight, well, probably 11:59, all that surplus goes into helping us achieve energy efficiency projects next year. So there's a funny timing issue. And actually, the board said, no, we're not willing to relax our golden rules. We should really be aware of where we're going. And the golden rules were there to give us a margin to cope with when things go wrong. So please carry on reporting on them. We're not going to dilute them. And give us enough warning when you're getting close. And actually, I'll be very honest, our social housing interest cover golden rule, we will breach next year. The budget does not meet the golden rule. So we are much tighter on finances. We then said, as the year goes on, you sort of know that you've got so much money left in the budget. And, if we've got any contingencies that haven't been spent, can we release them? And they said, well, yes, but you're going to have to come back to the board to ask us. We're not going to give you a blank check that allows you as the directors just to say, well, we've underspent asset management, so we can put a bit more into something else. Come back and have that discussion. The budgets are the budgets. And if you're not going to perform to a budget or you're outperforming a budget, let us as a board, and I think that's appropriate, make the decision of what you should be doing. And then the really difficult one for me, because I know there is huge housing need out there in Norfolk and Suffolk. But actually, we're halving our development target on affordable homes. So rather than aiming for 150, it will be 75, roughly, 50 rented and 25 shared ownership. We'll continue focusing on getting consents. So when we hit that point where actually we can step up again, we're not at the beginning of a planning process or a land acquisition process. And of course, once we've got consented sites, especially if they're ones for Broadland St Benedict's, we will have the option in a difficult year to actually sell the site rather than developing it ourselves. So we'll carry on. We're not shrinking the development team, but we are sadly and really regretfully, but there's no way we can do anything other. For the next 3 to 4 years, we're imagining that we're going to be reducing to 75 per year, which isn't the lowest we've ever done. We had a period around after 2011 when it was lower. And actually, one of the old tasks that Paula kindly gave me was to try to write the history of Broadland. I've managed to get to when I was 18 so far, so I've got 42 years there still to go. And there were some years when we only delivered 14 and in the 90s. So, you know, there is a point about being a long-term business, a long-term organization. And this was the other one about if operational budgets are outperformed, can we reallocate? No, we can't. It's the same point they made earlier. So I think, broadly speaking, when we got to the January board, a couple of months later, we were all between a rock and a hard place. We absolutely knew, having done the draft budget, that we could not go for a rent increase less than 7%. We knew in real terms, you know, even with 7%, all those decisions, those discussions we made in November were going to be really tough. And I have to say, I think it's been one of the most difficult budgeting exercises that we've had in years. But we had connected income with expenditure and our ambition with reality. There was no point in saying we can carry on building 150 or we can deliver EPC by 2028, because actually we couldn't do it. We didn't, you know, you can only spend £1 once, and you have to earn that £1 before you spent it. So I think we were aware, and my inbox and other people's inbox have been very aware that actually the rent and service charge increases, I mean, utility costs have been astronomical increases, like something like 300%. We knew they weren't going to be well received by any tenant, just like I'm not a great recipient of my electricity bill. Fortunately, I'm not on gas, so I don't need to worry about that, except I have to still buy oil, which is quite terrifying. And actually, coming back to that point, pardon? Yeah, I won't tell you how much I'm spending a month into the account, and it seems to disappear.
How much you was trying to see.
Yeah.
I was thinking.
Yeah.
God, today.
When we moved here 26 years ago, and I think I paid 12 pence a litre for our first oil delivery. Gosh, those were the days. Anyway, there we go. I said earlier that I know that 99.9% recurring of our tenants judge us by asset management, by cyclical repairs and responsive repairs. I therefore know that even with a rent, which many people are saying is high, and service charges, which many people are saying are higher, plus the constraints we're putting on our asset management bills, it's hardly a driver for tenant satisfaction. And that's where we are. So I said now here, it's sort of a bit of a reality check for us. Broadland is 60 years old this year. Well, I suppose strictly speaking, it's already been 60, but actually the first home wasn't built for completed until 1967, I think, 66, 67 at Shipfield. Our aim as an organisation, because we're very, very cognizant that as a staff team and as board members, we're only the custodians of, we don't own Broadland. And our responsibility is to ensure that Broadland can celebrate its 70th birthday, that we don't back it into a financial corner where we have to look for a bailout from one of the nationals and we just become an anonymous bit of their operating. So right now we are having to compromise our 22 strategy, which I hate. We're still going to comply with all regulation, and we need to make sure that we don't stretch ourselves to breaking now. I found a little cartoon which I quite liked. I think the top is where we thought in March 22 it was going to be a smooth cycle ride to deliver the next 4 years of what we aimed for, what we hoped for, what we expected. And actually it feels much more like the diagram at the bottom with all sorts of horrible hazards en route. It's going to be tough. It's going to be tough for tenants when we can't do things. It's going to be tough for the staff team when they can't do things, because actually we've got an extremely committed staff team who really care. And it's tough for everyone, staff and tenants, with the cost of living increases. You know, everybody is having costs that they didn't anticipate and income worth less than it was 12 months ago. So the 22-26 strategy, if I'm coming to look forward, yeah, that's what it feels like, the reality. It's still our direction of travel. It's uncompromised. We still want to achieve what we want to achieve. The destination hasn't changed. The timetable's changed. The arrival time, as I put it there. We've got to actually have pragmatic realism, and that must be our priority as an organisation. And that means managing expectations. Managing expectations for everyone that lives in a home that we look after, for everybody who wants to live in a home that we look after, that doesn't currently live in a home that we look after, and also for our staff team. And I think it's all about responsibility and acting responsibly over the time ahead. I like quotes. I like to put in the occasional quote. And when I was writing this presentation, two came to me, and I don't know why, but I thought they were relevant. The first one was Mother Julian of Norwich, who said, all shall be well, all shall be well, all manner of things shall be well. And for those of you who are less spiritual, the best exotic Marigold Hotel, everything will be all right in the end. So if it's not all right, it is not the end. And I think one's got to have some sense of optimism, because otherwise it would just be too depressing right now. Over the past 60 years of Broadland, as I can see reading countless minutes, it's really frustrating. Just before first lockdown, I saw Martin Miller, who was the first chief executive, and we agreed to get together, and I was going to record his reminiscing about those early. He joined about 1968 and retired in 1991. And sadly, because of COVID, before I ever got to that, he died last August. So my version of the history of Broadland is dependent on minutes of board meetings. I don't even have the accompanying papers, so it's really interesting. And basically, a book about that thick is about 3 years worth of Broadland's history. So it's quite an entertaining experience. Over those years, we have coped with low and high inflation. We have coped with, I don't know how many recessions, I should count them really. We've coped with politics, pro and anti, if we're completely honest. We've coped with huge social change. I mean, the idea that I should be sitting here with some people sitting at home, watching on a screen, compared to what was handwritten minutes occasionally in the early years. And we've coped with prejudices. You know, I'm thinking back, funny enough, when we had the photo opportunity down in Thetford, the deputy leader of Broadland Council was congratulating us on the scheme that we built next to Netherwood High School in Dereham in about 2007, 2008, where we actually had a 1,000 signature petition against the scheme, including people that lived in Guildford, which I always thought was interesting. And I was told by a number of people in Dereham, including, if I'm completely honest, one of the councillors, it was the wrong side of Dereham for poor people to live in. It's a bit like I built some homes when I was at Peddars Way, and I was told they didn't look like social housing. I said, thank you very much. They said, but they should, because they're social housing. No, you build tenure blind. It doesn't matter. And I think that's what actually we've done very well. And I think over those years, we've remained resilient. We're still here. Optimistic. What else? But focused. The word vocational, I think, is really strong. I think one of the things that fills me with huge pride about working with the people at Broadland is that they believe in Broadland. And that might be a reason why there's quite a few of us now who've been here quite a long time. I'm not looking at anybody in the room. I would become cross-eyed if I did. But I think, I mean, I've been here 20 years and there's 17 people that have been here longer than that. And that's quite unusual in organisations, including 2 in this room, actually, and remained committed. So looking forward, I don't know, but I remain hopeful. And I think that's all I can say. And that was my last slide.